It's Black History Month, so let's talk about Black Jews and multiculturalism, plus the countdown to the Messianic Age, and a closer look at the Ten Commandments. This is Rabbi Yossi Madvig, and you're listening to Jews Did It First. Whoa, that's a jam-packed show, but I'm sure we can do it. Like I mentioned last week, I'm now on YouTube, so if that's easy for you, then go for it. But please subscribe, share, get notifications, ring that little bell, write your comments down below. But however you're listening, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, the website, whatever it is, like it, share it around the world, because that's what's going to get the word out. And if you like what you hear and you'd like to donate to help contribute to the podcast, then please go to jewishoswego.org/Jews Did It First. Just click on the Make a Donation button in the upper right-hand corner. And I'll hopefully put the link in the description down below on YouTube. So, Black Jews, in theory, go all the way back to Moses. In the Bible, in Numbers 12:1, it mentions that Moses' wife is a Cushite. Now, it's somewhat disputed about where exactly Cush is, but it's mentioned in the Septuagint as being generally accepted that it's Ethiopia. Some say Libya or Somalia. There are other opinions, but the point is that it's a country where the inhabitants are black. Now, if that's the case, then that would make Moses' wife and children black. Parenthetically, our sages explain that this was not the case, as Moses' wife was Midian, not from Cush. Instead, they explain that she was beautiful and give a couple of reasons why the term Cushi is used in that context. Perhaps Jews did the phrase black is beautiful first also. However, throughout history, black people have been Jewish, either by conversion or intermarriage, and, of course, there's the famous airlifting of the Ethiopian Jews in the early 80s. We've actually had a couple of students involved in our Jewish center here that were black and Jewish, and quite honestly, I love it. It brings home the message that Torah is truly for everyone. Judaism is for everyone. This whole myth that Judaism is a white European thing is absolutely ridiculous. And it also shows the white European ethnocentric bias of those who say it. Believe me, Jews from the Middle East are not white Europeans. Nowadays, most Middle Eastern Jews from places like Yemen or Egypt or Iran or Iraq, etc., are living in predominantly white countries, but that's because they were actually run out by the Muslim majority in the country of their origin. But I digress. So, what about multiculturalism? Well, the dictionary definition of multiculturalism is the presence of, or support for the presence of, several distinct cultural or ethnic groups within a society. I don't quite understand this definition. If the word culture is in the word, why do they throw in ethnic groups? People can have different ethnicity and belong to the same culture, like black and white British people, for example. Likewise, you can have people of the same ethnicity with very different cultures, such as North and South Koreans, for instance. So, I'm just going to focus on the cultural aspect. I don't think it's really possible to have a minority culture fully integrated into its host country, 100%. The minority culture will a priori be subject to the legal and cultural rubric of the dominating culture. For instance, there may be cultural restrictions on women or children in one culture that don't exist in the host culture, and may even be outlawed in the host culture. But more importantly, I think the underlying premise of this philosophy is that all cultures are equally valid and worthwhile, or at least most of them are, and therefore they can just all integrate within each other, and you can have this big mixed salad, I guess is the analogy that's used to counter the melting pot analogy. I'm not sure that's right. For instance, a culture, I'm not saying it's 100% wrong, I just don't think it works all the time. A culture which glorifies killing innocents, like the Mayans with virgin sacrifices, or a subset of Islamic culture that believes in honor killings or suicide attacks against civilians, is incompatible with a culture that abhors such practices. Ultimately, I believe the dominant culture has to dictate what practices they will accept or tolerate and those that they won't. And the US is a good example. You're allowed to be a communist and live here, but that whole revolution of the masses thing isn't really going to fly so much. Or what about people trying to keep a Viking culture? They're Odinists, I believe they're called, for the religious aspect of it. In the Viking culture, killing was pretty normal if it suited them. I don't think that would work here. And so, in fact, modern Odinists are quite tame from what it used to be, say, 1,000 years ago, or even just a few hundred years ago. So with that caveat, I think we can now show practical multiculturalism. There's the First Amendment, in a more modern sense of multiculturalism, which allows people to practice their religion and assemble freely. And before that, the British imposed rule on a territory, and although they would dictate how things would work, the regular people would pretty much keep their ways. But, Russia, Rome, Greece, most of the ancient world would just conquer and impose their way of life. As soon as Rome would conquer a territory, suddenly Roman cultural things would start popping up, and the regular folk culture of that place would pretty much just be relegated to some rural areas that it was hard to have more control over. Now, granted, a lot of people lived in rural areas in those days out there, but still, when it came to the cities, when it came to the major places of conquering, that culture, whether it be Greek or Roman, was placed there to sort of, in a certain sense, root out the other one. You didn't have such separate cultures within the empires. Now, there were separate cultures within the empires, but there were real attempts to homogenize them. Only on the outskirts of the empire was life very similar to what it was before the conquest. But one culture stands out. The Torah teaches that Adam, and subsequently Noah, was given 7 laws. These laws are not to worship idols, not to curse God, to establish courts of justice, not to commit murder, not to commit adultery or sexual immorality, not to steal, not to eat flesh torn from a living animal. That last was specifically given to Noah. And this set of laws is called the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, or the 7 Noahide laws. And this is a basic rulebook given to the world to function properly. But it doesn't mean only these 7 things. Each one incorporates a lot more. For instance, establishing courts of justice also incorporates coming up with laws for the running of your society. Just laws that don't go against the other 6. There's nothing wrong with coming up with other laws that the society feels will help encourage the citizens to live happier lives, whether that's property law, whether that's speed limits, whatever it is. So there's a lot of things incorporated into that. Not murdering doesn't just mean don't kill someone. There's also an aspect of simple respect for life in general. And that means not hurting people, whether that be physically or emotionally. And, there's a lot of other things that could come into there, abuse, etc. Not to steal also incorporates, there's a lot of ways of stealing. You could steal someone's property. You could steal someone's mind. In Hebrew, it's called genevat da'at, meaning you're lying to them, you're tricking them, you're deceiving them. These things also are incorporated in that. Sleep. So you could steal someone's sleep. Waking someone up is, in a certain sense, a form of stealing. And in general, not just forget stealing, but respect for other people's property. Not to vandalize, etc. Not to eat the flesh torn from a living animal. What this basically means is to wait until an animal is completely dead before consuming it, before starting to butcher the meat. And it incorporates some other things as well. Falling under this rubric is general treatment of animals, being kind, being considerate of animal life. In fact, Jewish law, we're talking about the Noahide laws, which is for the world at large, but in Jewish law, it goes into great detail about whether or not a fly trap is humane because, it could be causing pain, etc. So, these things are incorporated within that rubric. So, here's the question. If this is for the non-Jews, as the Torah and its 613 commandments are for the Jews, these 7 laws are for the non-Jews, then who needs to accept this form of conduct? That would be those people who live under Jewish rule but are not Jews. That's what we're speaking about in particular. So you see, Judaism teaches that the world doesn't need to comport to Jewish rules of conduct. Outside of these 7 basic rules, non-Jews are free to do as they please. We believe that that's the way that they are called, that's what they are called to do in order to be righteous and good. Unlike so many other cultures and religions that spread through conquest and conversion, Jews had a different game plan. Are there certain basics that humanity must observe? Sure. But by and large, we recognize that just about every culture is good for the people who practice it, and they're doing what God wants of them. And this is really the basic principle of multiculturalism. And, as you guessed it, Jews did it first. And now, the counter-missionary. I want to cover a big topic in just a few minutes, so I'd encourage you to get more detailed information, whether that's from Jews for Judaism, whether that's from Outreach Judaism, whatever you want. But this is the main gist. Lately, missionaries have made a big deal about Daniel 9. Daniel chapter 9, specifically verses 24 through 27. So here's how the King James Version reads. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to rebuild and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And the last verse, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Okay, so a little bit heady, but sounds pretty nice, right? It mentions the Messiah. That's always cool. Talking about him being cut off sounds kind of like, right, the crucifixion story. It's pretty neat. Just a few small problems. First of all, what are these weeks that we're talking about? Who's this Messiah and how many are there? And always, context. It should be noted that this was actually never used by Paul or the Gospels or any of the church fathers to convince Jews. Why is that? Only in modern times has it been used. And we'll consider modern times, sort of the rise of modernity, maybe the Renaissance period, a little before the Renaissance. This is the King James Version. You see already, we'll get into some translation issues there. So already from that time, but sort of modern, historically modern times. So what did they know that modern missionaries seem to miss? Let's find out. The first thing you need to know and everyone agrees, is that the weeks mentioned here refers to a set of 7 years. So therefore, 1 week is 7 years, 7 weeks, 49 years, 62 weeks, that's 62 weeks, that's 434 years. First off, with the mention of the Messiah, the Prince, the Hebrew does not say this. There is no definite article "the" in this verse. It says a Messiah Prince, or a Prince Messiah. Also, Messiah is just a Greek or Latin transliteration of the word Moshiach, which means anointed. So therefore, the proper way to translate this verse is an anointed prince, not the anointed prince. And of course, to say the Messiah Prince has obvious connotations that they want you to read into it and that modern missionaries will promulgate. But really, it's just an indefinite article. It's just, there's this anointed prince guy. So who's that talking about? Well, it says he'll come after 7 weeks, right? 7 weeks. And then there's the prince guy. So that's 49 years. What are you talking about? I mean, Jesus didn't come in 49 years after Daniel wrote this. So what they do is they conflate the 7 weeks into the 62 weeks to make a period of 69 weeks. Now you'll notice when we read it, it didn't say 69 weeks. It said 7 weeks and 62 weeks. There's a big difference. So that's one issue. And also the context just doesn't support this idea that these two are conflated. Plus, 69 weeks is 483 years. That doesn't take you to Jesus. How do I know? Context. I wish I had more time to show you, but if you'd like more info, like I said, I'll put some links down for the YouTube video. I'll try and throw some links maybe on the Facebook page to Jews for Judaism, Outreach Judaism. You can look at what we're talking about here. They probably have some visuals over there. But basically, in short, Daniel, we're just parachuting, remember. We just parachuted into verse 24 through 26, 27. That's the end of the chapter. What's going on over here? Well, Daniel expects the salvation of the Jews from Babylon, since the 70-year prophecy of Jeremiah seemingly ended with the death of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, by Darius the Mede. Okay? So Jeremiah, in 2 places in his book, both in chapter 25 and chapter 29, mention a 70-year prophecy. So he sees 70-year prophecy, assumes they're the same prophecy. Boom. 70 years from the capture of Jerusalem till the death of the Babylonian king by Darius the Mede. So great. The Jews should be going home any time now, right? Well, really, there were 2 70-year prophecies of Jeremiah. So the first one ended, yes, with the death of the king of Babylon, but the second one wouldn't end for another 18 years. Okay? That was the first 70-year prophecy was from the capture of Jerusalem, but the second 70-year prophecy was from the destruction of Jerusalem, which happened 18 years later. And that's when Cyrus would ordain the rebuilding of Jerusalem. But the angel Gabriel is giving Daniel a deeper insight into this 70-year prophecy of Jeremiah by making this 70 years into 70 weeks of years. Okay, so then each week is 7 years, and by doing that, it's a little more than 49 years, or 7 weeks, from the destruction of the temple. Remember, even from the King James Version, even when you read that, it says that from the going forth of, now it said from the commandment, but that's actually not what it says. In the Hebrew it says davar, from the word. And that's how Jeremiah describes his prophecy over there. It's the word, right? So the going forth of the word, from the beginning of Jeremiah's prophecy to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah comes shall be 7 weeks. A little bit after 49 years from the destruction of the temple, Cyrus comes along this king or prince, Cyrus, comes along and orders the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. This is who the anointed prince of the 7 weeks is, as Isaiah himself calls Cyrus in chapter 45 of Isaiah, calls him the anointed one, the Mashiach. Not the Mashiach, but he calls him Moshiach. He uses that term to describe Cyrus. Then the prophecy says, after 62 weeks, or 434 years later, another anointed one will be cut off. Remember, there's 2 kinds of anointed people. There's kings, that's the first one, and the second one is the priest in the Holy Temple. And indeed, after another 434 years, Nero starts messing with the Jerusalem and the temple, and he actually agrees to allow the temple to stand. But then he breaks that deal. So there's from that point, there's this 7-year period, of time where halfway through, like it even said in Daniel, again, even going from the King James Version over here, in the midst of that last week, right? He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, right? He makes this covenant for a week, right? He makes this covenant that he won't do anything, he'll let it go, and then partway through, right, in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And that's exactly what happened halfway through. The temple sacrifice ends, and the priestly functions stop. And then a few years after that, then the temple and Jerusalem are destroyed. And thus ends your 70 weeks of years, as prophesied by Jeremiah and understood by Daniel through the angel Gabriel. And that's why missionaries never used to use this to prove Jesus. So with that, I'd like to share a little insight into the 10 Commandments, specifically the first commandment. And it's interesting to note, by the way, that if you add up all the letters in the 10 Commandments, then you end up with the number 620, which represents the 613 biblical commandments plus the 7 rabbinic commandments. So that's a cute little tidbit of information. But I want to talk just very briefly about the first commandment, which says, if you remember, all the way back there, and it's in this week's Parsha, this week's Torah portion, it says, I am Lord your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, and so on. So, if I were God, and I wanted to introduce myself to these people, you'd think I'd want to say something like, hey, I'm the one who created everything. I'm the one who made heaven and earth. I made you. I made life. I made everything. I'm this ultimate being, and that's why you should now do what I'm about to tell you. But he doesn't do that. He says, remember that cool trick where I split the sea? Or, remember all that bad stuff you were going through in Egypt? Yeah, I'm the guy that took you out of that. So it seems kind of like a downer. I mean, sure, thanks and all, but it doesn't necessarily show you as an authoritative figure. Just because someone gets you out of a bad situation doesn't necessarily make them your friend. There's a funny story about that, but I won't go into it now. With a bird and a cow, you can Google it. Anyway, so the point is, why did God do this? Why did God tell them, instead of this big, there's thunder, lightning, there's this whole show going on, this whole amazing revelation at Mount Sinai, and he starts off by saying, I'm the guy that took you out of Egypt. So there's a few reasons for this. What I want to focus on is mainly the idea that 2 things. One, God is telling them, yes, I'm the creator of heaven and earth and all that good stuff, but that's so in the past. That happened thousands of years ago, and I'm the God who's in your real life experience. You were going through this terrible thing, and I got you out of it just now. Remember, it was just 7 weeks prior, by the way, that they left Egypt. And then for a year, they didn't really have much slavery. But, everyone alive right now remembers very vividly what it was like. Life under Egyptian rule. It was hell. And God is saying, I'm the God who is in history. I'm in your life. I'm helping you right now. Okay, that's good for them. What does that do for us? How is, the Torah, we say the Torah is eternal. So how does that first commandment help us? Right? That's good for the Egyptians. That's good for the Jews in Egypt. But how does that help me in my day-to-day life? Honestly, it's the same message. God is giving a general message. I'm not just this nebulous being, this, old man in a chair way up in the sky sitting around, after I created heaven and earth and just letting things run on their own, who doesn't care or who's not in control. No, 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 God says. I'm very much in control. I am a God of history. I'm embedded into the fabric of the universe, into the world, and into your personal life. I heard your cries in Egypt and I took you out of there. What did God care about our cries in Egypt? God is, doing whatever God does. I don't know. He's this infinite being. What does he care about the goings on of our personal life and of our personal situation? God says, I care very much. I care about you. Why? Does he have to? No, he chose to. I care very much about you and what you are going through, your personal struggles, your joys, your hardships. And that's where I'm going to be found, God says. I'm going to be the one to get you out of your Egypt. The word Egypt means borders or constraints. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, from the word Meitzar. And God says you have limitations that whether you place on yourself or that are imposed on you by others. God says, I can get you out of those. I can make you and help you become the most free person, physically and spiritually especially, that you can be. And here's how. And he goes on and gives us a list of the commandments. And these commandments, not just the 10 commandments, all the commandments, the whole point of the commandments is to free us, right? On the one hand, we could say now we're servants to God. But the truth is we're a soul. We're a soul in a body, right? What does the soul want to do? The soul wants to connect to God. Does the body want to connect to God? Not so much. It's not its natural tendency. The soul's natural identity is to be connected to God. And so God says, here's how I'm going to free your soul. Here's how I'm going to allow your soul to do what it wants. I'm going to give you these mitzvahs. I'm going to give you these commandments. And that way your soul will get what it wants, which is to connect to me even in this physical world and in a body. So Shabbat Shalom. Wish you all a wonderful Shabbos and a freeing, liberating, mitzvah-filled Shabbos.
But even if my tongue was sweet and lips graceful, I was